My talk today is on accelerating parallel verification via complementary property partitioning and strategy exploration. And this is joint work with Jason Baumgartner, Robert Kanzelman, Mark Williams, and Kristin Rozier. So going back to basics, the process of model checking takes as input a model M of the system under verification and a property P representing the system requirements. The verification engine then checks if the property satisfies the model, and if not, returns a counterexample trace that shows the exact execution of the system that violates the property. However, the situation is a lot different for practical verification tasks. Instead of just one property, there are usually multiple properties to be verified against the model M. A more realistic model checking workflow looks like this. The verification engine checks the model against several properties and reports the verification result for all model property combinations. A typical verification scenario is of the highly prevalent verification task of equivalence checking. In equivalence checking, two designs, design A and design B, are proven equivalent by tying their inputs together and checking the equivalence between their outputs. Moreover, proving equivalence between intermediate design points is critical for the overall scalability of sequential equivalence checking. Every such equivalence between design nodes is a property that has to be verified, and proving the overall equivalence often entails thousands or even millions of properties to check. Property grouping helps improve the scalability of multi-property checking. The different properties are partitioned into high affinity groups based on structural similarity measured in terms of cone of influence. The properties in a group are then verified concurrently, and the different groups can be verified in parallel. The verification effort expended for a property in a high affinity group can be directly reused for verifying other properties in that group. To mitigate the quadratic performance slowdown due to pairwise comparisons between properties, state-of-the-art grouping algorithms perform three-level approximate clustering that achieves linear runtime in practice. The properties in the generated groups can then be checked concurrently, or the properties in a group can be semantically refined using localization abstraction. It is important to note that higher levels of grouping generate progressively fewer groups, and the different groups can be checked in parallel. The verification of group properties significantly improves end-to-end verification performance. The impact is more pronounced on localization abstraction, for which the size of the abstraction learned is sensitive to structural similarities between the properties that are localized concurrently. The property grouping procedure partitions properties for parallel verification. It is often the case that the number of available parallel compute nodes are known before starting the verification task. State-of-the-art verification tools utilize different strategies for parallel verification of property groups. There is property partitioning, in which, given a set of properties, a property partitioning manager groups the properties based on cone of influence and dispatches them to workers running identical algorithms. Then there is the strategy exploration verification, parallel verification strategies, in which the set of properties are distributed across workers running different algorithms. However, in the typical usage of these parallel strategies, there is significant resource wastage and redundant computation that can be avoided to maximize verification throughput. Instead of thinking about these strategies in silo, we optimize complementary property partitioning and strategy exploration. We identify problems with the typical usage of these strategies and propose optimizations to minimize resource wastage and redundant computation. The first problem that we solve is that of resource underutilization, in which the grouping algorithm generates fewer groups than available parallel workers. In the example shown in the figure, the 3 generated groups are dispatched to 3 out of 5 available nodes, and the 2 nodes that do not receive a group simply idle. In this work, we improve state-of-the-art in property grouping algorithms such that given groups G1 and G2, our new property grouping procedure rebalances G1, G2 into smaller but guaranteed higher affinity groups. Since now we have 5 groups to verify, Each node works on a separate group and we have full utilization of available resources. Another common problem is that some compute nodes may start idling while other nodes solve hard-to-prove property groups. Going back to our example, with 3 groups and 3 compute nodes, each compute node works on an individual group and tries to prove the properties in the group. Now it may happen that groups G0 and G1 are easier than group G2 and can be proved easily. Once they are proved, the 2 nodes which finish their tasks start idling while the third continues solving the hard-to-prove group G2. Our rebalancing procedure, which we introduced in this paper, enables us to split the unsolved group and dispatch the unsolved properties in that group across the idle nodes while still keeping the benefits of high affinity group verification. There are several other common problems that impact parallel verification strategies. There is the problem of redundant computation across workers when each worker verifies the same group at the same time. To solve that problem, we introduce an iteration order heuristics that allows finer grained control on the order of group iteration in individual workers. Then there is the problem of progress inhibition, in which a worker gets stuck on a harder group and several easier groups might follow. Our controlled repetition heuristic enables fast and lossy and aggressive verification strategies that enable pausing the verification of hard groups, progressing to easier groups, and eventually returning to the hard group. It is important to note that incrementality is essential to fully utilize controlled repetition of property groups. Lastly, there is the problem of time degradation, in which a group cannot be proved even after several repetitions. To solve that problem, we introduce a decomposition heuristic that allows us to decompose hard-to-prove property groups into smaller subgroups using our rebalancing procedure. So we evaluate our proposed techniques in a redundancy removal portfolio. Redundancy removal is a core algorithm for sequential equivalence checking and reduces the composite model by identifying equivalences between intermediate design points. Each equivalence is a property, and a typical redundancy removal task often has thousands of properties that have to be proven. While the easier equivalence properties are solved using lightweight techniques for simulation, like simulation and k-induction, the harder and non-inductive properties are solved using localization abstraction, for which it is the best known technique. In this work, we design a 6-process localization portfolio, which we called the best portfolio, to solve the difficult non-inductive properties that arise in redundancy removal applications by optimizing both strategy exploration and property partitioning. To measure the impact of our portfolio on redundancy removal, we compare 4 different 6-process localization portfolios derived from our best portfolio. There is the base portfolio that represents a state-of-the-art localization portfolio without grouping. The next is the base plus G portfolio that extends the base portfolio and represents a state-of-the-art localization portfolio with grouping. Then there is the best minus D portfolio that extends the base plus G portfolio with our incremental repetition and iteration order heuristics. And lastly, there is the best portfolio that adds decomposition to the best minus D portfolio and solves all the parallel verification problems that we identify in this paper. Coming to our results, the best portfolio is successful in optimally balancing work distribution across parallel processes. The 3 fast and lossy processes solve almost equal number of properties, and so do the 3 aggressive processes. Due to the uniform work distribution between the fast lossy processes, the aggressive processes can now focus on the hardest of properties, while the fast and lossy processes chip away easier properties. In contrast, the first fast and lossy process in the base plus G portfolio solves considerably more number of properties compared to the other 2 fast and lossy processes, which is indicative of scheduling limitations across processes. The ability to optimally distribute work across processes enables our best portfolio to offer significant end-to-end verification speedups. In contrast to the base plus G portfolio, which represents a state-of-the-art portfolio with grouping, The best portfolio achieves a median 2.4x speedup and successfully solves 18.1% more properties. So coming to the end of my talk, our work improves parallel verification for multi-property verification. We optimize complementary property partitioning and strategy exploration, and we extend state-of-the-art on property grouping to guarantee parallel resource utilization. We also propose heuristics to optimally distribute work across parallel workers, and we develop a state-of-the-art localization portfolio for redundancy removal. Thank you.